Good morning, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Talk About It with Sam, where we discuss today's current events, life, health, wealth, and lifestyle. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe for more content. We have so much more to come. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talk About It with Sam. Today, I'm going to be interviewing a new friend of mine, Swinks. Swinks is a male based out of Springfield, Massachusetts, and was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 16. Fortunately enough, he did not have to fulfill the entire life sentence, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about that. Hi, Swinks, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to kind of just like jump right in. So when you were 16 years old, there was a drug-related home invasion and then a homicide, correct?
At 17, yes.
17, sorry about that. Okay. So let's kind of talk a little bit about that.
As far as
What happened that day?
it was just a miscommunication and on my end, honestly. And it was of a lack of knowing how to process my emotions at 17 years old. So it was a conversation I had with a person that I was close with. And, I was trying to put myself in what I thought at that time, a financial position to earn more money. And, the conversation didn't go the way that I thought it should have went, meaning, him allowing me to be able to sell drugs out of the home that he was occupying in, which was his family's home. So, it was back and forth on trying to like come up to a negotiation where I could actually put myself in a position to leverage to make more money. But he kind of felt like, well, I'm interpreting how he must have felt like, this is my space. I don't really want too much people there. When he had the right, I just felt like I had a false sense of entitlement that I belonged there because him and I was cool. So because there was that lack of maturity on my end for my emotions, I didn't know how to process that wrong, and I felt like I was being slighted and disrespected by him. And then that's when I kind of planned for this home invasion and robbery to take place.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. So I kind of just want to back up just for a second because you come from a very nice home. So you come from a two-parent household, correct?
Yes.
A ton of brothers and sisters and a sister that you're super close with.
Yes.
That's awesome. Okay. I love that very much. Do you think that some of that negativity and the violence was more based off your environment?
Absolutely. There's inside of the home, that's one environment. And both of my parents, instilled great morals in me. But here's the key, or what I felt like at that time, they didn't really understand. You're giving me the tools to survive because my parents are immigrants from Haiti. So they understood that environment. So they're trying to instill the morals and principles that they had over there. So coming into a culture that they really didn't understand, it was like it was a culture shock for everybody in the house. So they're just trying to give me the best tools possible for me to survive in an environment they felt like, well, that they didn't really quite understand. And I had to kind of like still taking a lot of the things that they were teaching me, but I had to apply it to a context to where I was at. So, my both my parents are super religious and they're very like, easygoing, meek, and just try to talk it out. And I'm like, maybe that would have worked in the environment which you came from, which is predominantly like rural. Everybody kind of know everybody, everybody's family. You could just call their mother, and then it'll be the end of that. Where I don't speak the language, and you're being teased for that. I don't know the dress code, and I'm being teased for that. No one is family oriented with minds, so we're really kind of like by ourselves. So there was a lot of fist fighting that was going on, and on top of that, my parents didn't have the income to kind of like help me to overcome some of those like obstacles that I was facing. So that's the kind of environment that I was kind of placed in, and that's where my parents and I bumped heads. So when I left the home setting, it was kind of like, all right, let me figure this thing out on my own. And that's kind of like what I did.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Wow. That's, that's a tough position. So you were 17 at the time, and then so the homicide happened.
Yes.
The gentleman, he was in roughly about his mid 40s and he was shot.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Um, and then, so you were incarcerated in 2007.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. And then, so were you sentenced right away?
No, so I was 2.5 years in accounting.
Got it. Okay. Good to know. Um, let's kind of talk about what it was like transitioning from a young man because you were incarcerated at 17 and then you served 16 years. So what I really want to kind of just like talk about is the age frame between 17 and 21.
Yes.
Because the development between those years is crucial, especially for a young man. What was that like for you?
So when I went in there at 17 years old, I was honestly afraid, you know, because I've never planned for myself to go to prison at 17 years old. And then I'm in there with adults. So this is my first charge ever. I'm in there with a whole bunch of adults, and now I have to try to figure out this culture the best way I know how. And then there's all these, stories that you hear about jail and how violent it can become or how violent it is.
Mhm.
And, you know, people are coming home after their incarceration and they're telling you stories. So I soaked a lot of that in. So now I'm actually faced with that reality. And now I'm going in there with this, macho demeanor of saying, no one's gonna take advantage of me. I watch movies. You see these myths. So I watch movies. I'm this tough guy, but really I was just a afraid 17-year-old child, man.
Wow. Wow. Now we had a brief discussion prior to the podcast and you were very transparent with me. So as soon as you got in, you knew right away that really like you didn't belong there, that you had made a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, you start thinking after a while, like, is this really the lifestyle that I want to live? Like at one time I glorified this, like really glorified the streets. Like now I want to be considered, a real guy, a street guy, you know. But then when the reality hits you like, well, these are the outcomes of being a street guy. Either you're gonna be doing time in prison, jail, prison, whatever, or you're gonna end up in a grave. So I dodged the grave, but I went into the other one. So now I'm like having the time to slow down and think. And I'm like, I really don't want to spend like the rest of my life in an environment like this where I'm witnessing some of our friends leave and I'm seeing them in prison and then never actually getting the chance to see them again. I'm seeing my parents do a glass. The food is horrible. Like all those things that, that we took that I took for granted, really started to like make me think like, is this really the lifestyle that I want? And I was confronted with that question.
Absolutely. Now, did you ever seek mental health services while you were incarcerated?
Never. It was a stigma on that.
Mm.
Within the Black and brown community, mental health is already frowned upon.
Mhm.
And now I'm being told, like I'm still looking at it like the only people that go and seek mental health in prison are the crazy people. Like it's always what we call the bugged out dudes. The ones that are, they're on drugs or they're just doing wacky stuff. So you're like, man, I'm not one of those wacky people. But
Mhm.
these are the images, one that I see on TV is these type of people. But then I'm witnessing like, oh, it is the quote unquote weirdos that are going to sit down with somebody and talking to them about their feelings. So I didn't seek no mental health at all. 16 years in prison. Never did.
Wow. So yourself today, as the man you are today, would you advise differently to your younger self? Would you have advised you to seek mental health?
Honestly, no.
Okay.
And
That's
I'm
that's
gonna tell you,
very
I'm gonna
typical.
tell you, I'm gonna tell you why. While you're in there, it's hard for anyone of that's like Black and brown to find a therapist that's like culturally responsive.
Mhm.
So to sit down with a therapist, I would have told myself, and I do it now because I actually do see a therapist. But that's only because I have the option of choosing who I feel comfortable sitting down with and telling my story. And that's
Mhm.
what they can relate to and give me coping skills that's conducive to the environment that I may return back to, or I understand the environment that I came from. So why incarcerated? I would never, I wouldn't go back and say, hey, you should go talk to a therapist, because I would have felt like it was a waste of time. Well, so majority of those people are there just to get a check, and I'm not saying this is for everyone.
Mhm.
For me, it was just like I just witnessed, like it was just for you to get a check, and then it's people that doesn't really come from where you come from, so it's hard for you to identify with some of the traumas that you're facing. And I'm not saying
Right,
that to qualify to cook for anyone else, but culturally, we would have just not worked.
right, absolutely. Well, I'm proud of you, and I really appreciate you sharing that with all of us, the fact that you seek mental health now and that
Yeah,
you're actively in therapy, because that's
absolutely.
huge. It's beautiful. So I want to talk about that a little bit more. So you got into prison super young. You knew that you may have made a mistake. You didn't want to be there. You were super affected by a lot of the violence psychologically that had taken place while you were there. Let's talk about some of the things that you did right, because you were actually released from prison in 2014 when the laws changed and they said that it was cruel and inhumane to sentence juveniles to life. But you
Yes.
had already began kind of like a positive journey and a turnaround in your life prior to that law passing.
Yes.
So I want you to kind of talk to us a little bit about that. What are some things that you did?
All right. So the first thing I did was I got myself back in the classroom. So that was like the moment I entered so that was like 2007, so I was 17 years old. I said, you know what? Let me make myself proud and my parents proud by going back inside of a classroom. And so I started getting my GED. So that was kind of like the first step that I took to say, hold on, I want a different identity for myself. I don't want to keep being viewed as a person that doesn't know how to think, critically think,
Mm-hmm.
and that just keeps crashing out every time I have an emotional outburst, and I don't know how to control that. So the GED kind of helped me to just put myself in the spectrum to see how intelligent I am. And the more and more I put in the effort of going there every single day, I started seeing the progress. So I said, hold on, the problem is it's not that I'm not intelligent or I don't have the ability, it's the fact that I lacked a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started seeing that, I said to myself, you know what, I'm gonna take advantage of every program in here to see how it could benefit me. Despite how older and outdated the textbooks may have been and still are, I'm gonna see if I could uh, format it in a way that's beneficial to me. And that was like 2007. And since that time, I just continue on with higher education. So I got sentenced like 2010. Went to Shirley Max. It wasn't a lot of as far as for lifers go, because prior to that bill, to say anyone who was a first degree lifer, you had like a small block of guys that could actually do programming. They actually banned you from actually doing programs unless you were short term. So after that bill came out, then you start seeing an influx of programs open up to people who actually had life sentences. So there was BC started coming in. I got involved in the Tufts University program, going for like higher
And
education.
BC is Boston College.
Boston College, just thank you. Um, so my Wachusett came in with a business certificate. So I was taking advantage of any higher education that just to challenge myself. Because a GED is one thing, but can you do it on the collegiate level?
Mm-hmm.
So I started challenging myself in that area. And then it was just like Toastmasters that was available. Um, cognitive thinking skills, all those programs that I felt like helped me to be able to identify what was going on with me internally. I took advantage of that. And really, the Islamic courses, like I felt like that centered me a lot. And yeah, that's how I went, and really started like trying to transform myself to like the crystallized self of who I wanted to be. And even during that process, and it was like 2018 where I was doing a lot of research on how in the world is there so many people from my neighborhood or the Boston area that's just coming in so young. What's the common denominator that's making this engine run the way that it is?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've come to realize through some of my studies that I've done is the socioeconomic status.
Mm-hmm.
So I started really like digging into that more, like, okay, what's the wealth gap looking like? What's the disparities and inequities that fall within the socioeconomic space? And then one of my business partners and I, Michael Bronner, who's still incarcerated now, we came up with an idea like, yo, why don't we start a nonprofit that actually is geared towards that, teaching inner city youth about financial empowerment. So we
Mhm.
could give them alternatives so they could not fall into many of the traps that we fell into, just kind of giving them a way out. And we came up with the nonprofit. It's called Rebels, which is an acronym that stands for Raising Entrepreneurs, Building Essential Life Skills. And I got released last year, and I just been going full throttle with just trying to get it off the ground.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. So I want to circle back one more time. Do you think, so your dad was a teacher? He was a French teacher, correct?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Do you think so? And it sounds like you enjoy education very much. Is that true?
Yes, I do.
Do you think that you owe some of that to your dad?
Yeah,
I love
yeah, I
that.
do.
I wanted to kind of just like throw that in there.
Yeah, big shout out to my dad. He's a great teacher.
That's great. Um, so you were incarcerated in 2007. You were sentenced to life, but you actually only ended up serving 16 years.
Yes,
Correct. So you were released in August of 2023.
yes.
Okay. And in the meantime, so prior to your release, you had been through all of these things, but you really already started your what I want to call like a progressive journey. You started on a spiritual journey. You were working on converting to Muslim, correct?
Yes.
You got your GED, you got a ton of certificates, you started to engage with all of the Boston College and the Tufts programming. Um, Tell me how that has affected you in positive ways since your release in August of 2023.
So when I got released last year, August 31st, I went from leaving lower security prison, which is Old Colony, and I had to go check in with my parole officer to make sure he understood who I was and I know who he was, and they give you all the rundown on what your stipulations are. As soon as I left to go see, after seeing my PO, I went straight to Tufts University, and I started a 9-month course program from the My Turn program that the Tufts University actually has to offer. Guys are coming home from prison, and ever since that moment, I just been really uh, networking with a lot of people out here in the Boston because I'm not from Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave me my first introduction to that city. And I was able to, rub elbows and meet a lot of fantastic people, like in the academic space, in the nonprofit space, for-profit space, community activist work, politicians. So it was just like, that was kind of like my intro to Boston. And yeah.
That's absolutely beautiful. I love that so much. So now I want to kind of talk about, so you have been out for about a year and you have a lot of amazing things going on. So you have a full-time job, you have a podcast. Let's talk about that.
Well, I have a part-time job that I'm doing right now. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like I'm working with an organization that's called Spentum. It's it's a organization that works with system affected people
Mm-hmm.
like myself. And we have a contract with DMH. And so I've been going in and helping a lot of the Haitian refugees find like housing and resources. So that's what I kind of do part-time. And yeah, Rebels, the podcast is something I started like 2 months ago. I said to myself, I gotta start getting a lot of the jewels that these business owners have out here and start putting it out there on a platform where I could ask some really thought-provoking questions so we could get some benefit of what they've been doing for the last, they could just be a year. Some of the challenges that they have, some of the advice that they could give inspiring entrepreneurs like myself, that I can make sure that I stay on task when I have some of these self-defeating attitude that pops up or negative self-thoughts. Like, how did you overcome that?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the tools that you could give me as far as like in that space, but also where's the bread at? Like this is one of the main issues is capital. Like where, like, can
Mm-hmm.
you send me somewhere to institution? Like how do you go about filling in RFP or a grant or applying to some of these small business loans that are out there, like, like send me, like throw me a bone or something.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of like with and also highlighting their stories as well.
Right,
These are
right.
inspiring stories from people that are coming, defying a lot of odds and overcoming many challenges. And I feel like their story needs to be heard. Like these are mom and pop stores, or just regular, community businesses or nonprofits that are just really grassroots movements that are just really making like huge impact. So I feel like, these people should be highlighted. These are unsung heroes that we should be hearing about. So that's kind of like what I've been doing with the podcast and everything else. I'm in Bunker Hill going for my associates, and hopefully, ended up just getting the master's in social work. So I just been staying busy.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. You're doing such a great job.
Thank you.
You really are. Is there any advice that you would give to any kids, like in or youth period, that are in similar environments that you were raised in?
Yeah, I would. The advice is something that I heard from Master P and his son. It's actually an advice that he gave to his son. And he said, be bigger than your environment. I think oftentimes we get boxed into what we see, and we just feel like this is all that is all. But we have to understand that, we have to be bigger than just that. Be bigger than the four corners, be bigger than the titles that people give you, be bigger than things that, some of those negative things that people have said about you. You have to be bigger than that environment. So yeah, that's kind of like the advice that I want to give to the youth.
Wow, that was dope. That was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking this time with me. I really appreciate it. I'm super
Oh,
excited
thank
to
you
come
for
on your
having me.
podcast.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for taking this time. I really appreciate it. And this was like super, super informative. And I'm glad that you got to kind of like spread your word, tell your story, can reconnect with the youth. This is super important work that you're doing. And I hope that, you really continue your journey in that, you find great success in what you're looking for.
No, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you. I'm grateful for you having me on your podcast and allowing me to, just kind of like tell my story and letting my voice be heard. So I appreciate you a lot. I really do. It's an honor.
Absolutely. I look forward to networking with you again in the future.
Yeah, let's do it.
Take care.
You too.